Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Wine with Jimmy channel. Very, very delighted that you are on board watching these videos as help towards your challenging WSET courses. Challenging, but fun, hopefully. And I have a special guest for this video to help me go through the finer points. It's Mark Pygott. Hello, Mark. How are you?
I'm good, Jimmy.
You're a real asset to have here for all the students that are embarking on this big D3 unit, which is a sizable chunk of their studies, and certainly around examination technique. Many of the people watching this will know that they've followed on probably with a lot of my videos, which is all the content, but of course there needs to be putting that content to good use, all that knowledge to good use in terms of understanding things like WSET, timing, command verbs. So we'll go through those, and it'd be great to get your input into those as well. Okay, let's have a look at the question. After that wonderful introduction, we are looking at a question on Australia. Good day, mate. We are going to be talking about 3 areas, and it has a key command verb, which you and I, Mark, together have not done so far in these video questions. So comparing Adelaide Hills, Hunter Valley, and Margaret River. So these are not mutually exclusive standalone parts. We're going to need to actually references between these, and talking about the growing environment and then the wines produced. So yeah, we are talking about another question where we've got 40 minutes, right? 5 minutes preparation, and then 35 minutes to go through this question. So we're going to talk about how to do that very, very shortly. But of course, everybody at home, you have the option now of pausing and having a go yourself on how you would tackle this question, and then comparing that and contrasting that in great fashion to what we are calling, Mark, the model answer, if it is that. So please have a go now and join us on the other side very shortly. Okay, Mark, we've done questions before, you and I, where we've talked about, 20% weighting here, 60 there, 20 here, or a third there. Does this have any sort of hidden weighting in it because you've got 3 regions? Would you try and tackle them in thirds, or how would you do this?
I think it is implicit, really, Jimmy, in the sense that you've got 3 areas. You've been asked to compare them. Like you said, there's no specified weighting, simply because they're expecting you to probably address all 3 regions with a certain amount of equality.
Yeah.
And because you're not talking about them individually, I think poorer answers will do that. People will ignore the compare because it's harder work, and just say, this is what I know about Adelaide Hills.
Yep.
This is what I know about Hunter, etc., etc. But they are not asking you to do that. They're asking you to talk about the growing environment of Adelaide Hills, but then you need to compare that with the other 2. And that's going to be exactly the same when it comes to the styles of wine produced as well.
So, Mark, I mean, how does one really technically structure that? Because, when you've got 3 equally weighted parts, you would just write the first one, the second one, the third one. But here, of course, there's going to be a lot of crossover. So you still do them in 3 sections, or would this just be one flowing paper where you would do the growing environment, and then within the growing environment talk about Adelaide Hills, how that compares to the other 2, and then do the wines produced, for example, and then going through those 3? What would be your way of tackling this?
That would be the way that I would do it, Jimmy. I mean, I think that the growing, it'll feel, I mean, you can still have, it can still be a 2 or 3 paragraph growing environment answer. But I would definitely be linking all of that kind of together. And then, like you said, moving on to the way the wine's produced, and maybe you could again divide that up slightly by talking, if you think about them from a paragraph point of view, because I think sometimes people like the idea of in a sense a heading, and I think about paragraphs as really starting, even if it's not actually with one, within that first sentence, you're outlining what's going to follow. So that's in a sense your heading for your paragraph. And here, when you're talking about the wines that are produced, you might talk about the similarities in the wines that are being produced, if there are any. And that might be about winemaking. That might be about maturation, those kind of things, or actually the finished style of the bottled wine. And then you might talk about the differences. So all I'm trying to say is that there are, right there are two different paragraphs, aren't there? These are the similarities, these are the differences. And I think that's what you're trying to do. So within the same topic or theme, then you're breaking it up into smaller parts to give, the relevance to each individual paragraph that you build into your answer.
So just to quantify that, so everybody is on the same page, you're likely to sort of do the first part of your question on growing environment, where you would then split that into similarities and differences across those three regions, and then you'll have another part of your answer on wines produced, similarities and differences again.
Yeah, or I mean, and I'm not saying I don't want to be absolutely kind of what's the word? Not autocratic, but in the sense of telling you exactly that those are the words or whatever commands that you should be using. I'm just saying that whatever you think, there's something where you can compare, and then where you can also, and I suppose, I mean, I know contrast isn't part of this question in a sense, but it's again implicit within the answer, within the question. Sorry, that they're obviously, because they're not the same. So you're going to be talking about the areas where they are the same, and the parts where they're not. So I think that, yes, probably 2 or 3 paragraphs within that first section on the growing environment, and then 2 more likely in the final section on the wine styles produced.
It's structurally, the format of this is more complex for a student to get their head around, as we've just had a big discussion about it, right? So it means that in that short amount of time, if the student doesn't have the skill set to understand that command verb and then how to sort of mold their answer, it's going to really put them at a disadvantage, isn't it? So that's going to fit to that first sentence. Majority of papers contain a basic level of accurate information to the 3 regions. The reasons for papers not garnering more marks was supplementary and supporting decision. So they're able to get the climate, but the specific areas around topography, soils, and rainfall, for example. Next bit, sorry, there's a lot of words here. A lot to be said about when a question doesn't go right, which is fair enough. So too generic. So lots of papers said dry condition, need irrigation, but it's only a part of the story. So you need to talk about maybe growing season rainfall, for example, when it falls, humidity, linking it to humidity in areas threat of drought. So therefore not showing understanding in comparison to your level 3. And as you mentioned, Mark, we've got compare and contrast, meaning in the same area here, but different things, of course, but we've got compare. So we've gone through what this exactly means, but then the examiner's notes here are on an overview of the areas, I believe, because then we're going to go through these, the comparing. So most candidates approach the answer by describing each region, growing environments, and wine in order. This gave a logical structure and provided enough accurate facts were given. Will give you a basic parks, pretty much what we've been discussing just previously. So the best way would be, of course, the methodology you were talking about earlier. And let's go into that methodology, hopefully. Sorry, my internet connection's being a little bit slow. So what I've done here, we were just talking about this in the green room before, is we are comparing. So I want to list what each of these areas has in order to convey those comparisons. But Mark, I'd love if you can sort of talk to us about how you would go about doing that, for example. So comparing these 3 regions in terms of the growing environment. Now, what I've done is I've listed Adelaide Hills. On the next slide, it's Hunter Valley. The next is Margaret River. Would you find it better, Mark, if we just had them all up on the same slide?
I think it's probably easier. I mean, obviously, in the exam, you're probably not going to tabulate it quite like this. I think in the exam, though, in a sense, what Jimmy's done here is actually really the if you can do this in about 2 minutes, is almost the foundation of your plan, isn't it? It's about making sure that you write down a few key points about what truly are the differences between these three areas. And that will then, obviously, you'll kind of flesh that out when you populate your answer with these key points. So I think it's a very useful thing to do to actually be able to compare it through this tabulated form, Jimmy.
So that's great. That's great information, Mark. Thank you for saying that. Like that 5-minute planning, which we talked about earlier in the introductory section, is pivotal because it gives you that reference point to, it kind of brings you back, because you could easily go off on tangents, can't you, in a question like this, and looking at that structured plan that you put in place to actually go, actually, I need to be thinking about comparing these growing environments. So how would you go about sort of, give me some examples of how you would write these? What would you really show the examiner their knowledge and convey the knowledge in a well communicated way?
Yeah, I mean, I think we'll kind of see this. I know. Obviously we've seen the examiner's report, and so we know where students have failed, the ones that did, and where they went wrong. I think that what you've done here, in a sense, is, yes, of course, you could say, let's look at rainfall. The Adelaide Hills, has quite high rainfall, even including during the growing season, as does the Hunter Valley, which again causes high disease pressure. Whereas Margaret River has the majority of its rainfall, because it is a moderate maritime climate in this, or a warm maritime climate in this particular setting, in winter. And so, again, that is the thing is, you don't have a great deal of time really, and it is a very complicated question because of the way that they've asked you to structure it, because they're asking you to compare throughout the piece, throughout the essay. And the key thing is to recognize that you have to talk about the climate, you have to talk about the rainfall, because these are going to impact on the style of wines produced, which is going to be the second part of your answer. And in doing that, you can keep yourself on track by pointing out the factual information and making a reference to the problem or the mitigating factor that then brings to the situation. So here, I think, like I said, just taking the rainfall as a good example, and Jimmy said it earlier, is that you can say that all of these three areas at certain points have high rainfall, but the critical point here is, when do they have it? And as Jimmy mentioned, the Hunter Valley, the big problem is that you get quite a lot of rainfall during the growing season. Actually, you get the threat of rain around harvest time in particular, because we're in a really subtropical climate. And therefore, that is hugely different to having, even if you have the same amount of rain, but it's only falling in winter when there aren't any grapes on the vine, as you find in somewhere like Margaret River. So I think it really is a case of, don't just list, what I'm trying to say, Jimmy, in a very long, convoluted way, is don't just list this is the rainfall. Yeah. You need to point out where it falls and how that's different from somewhere else, and also the potential impact in terms of something like, for example, disease pressure. You don't need to get into how that impacts ultimately in the final style of the wine, because you will talk about that in the next section.
That's 2 points there I'd love to sort of emphasize again. First of all, you talked about linking phrases. It's absolutely critical in a question like this, because you are comparing, and use some examples. You said, as does, that is your similarity linking phrase. Whereas, which is your differences linking phrase. These things must be included, because they absolutely show that you are answering the question, you are comparing. If you don't do those, you're falling into that rabbit hole of just listing each section. So absolutely. And then you mentioned that critical thinking about understanding when the rainfall in our example will fall. And that is mightily important, because as you mentioned, and I want to back up with what the AWRI are doing, the Australian Wine Research Institute. They've hugely focused now on the differences between annual rainfall and growing season rainfall, because of the massive impact it can have, as you mentioned. So that's really, really important. Is there any other ones that would be important in that sort of vein here in this table, talking about maybe geology or?
I mean, I think all of these things that you've mentioned are really important. I mean, some of them are maybe more critical. I think obviously you've got to talk about the fact that the actual climates are very different. I know the Hunter being, like I said, almost subtropical, and all of the problems that come with that. I mean, again, I feel slightly scared to say what I'm about to say, Jimmy, because I love the Hunter Valley in the same way, and I was the international judge at the wine show there last year, and obviously, you know, I do a huge amount of work in Bordeaux, and I love Bordeaux. If we're being honest, would you, if you were starting all over again, would you plant a vineyard in the Hunter Valley? Would you plant out the Medoc, even though it produces some of the greatest Cabernet Sauvignon based wines in the world? The disease pressure because of that humid environment is significant, and this is exactly what we find here in the Hunter. However, what we then, which is the great thing about wine and the great thing about this question, is that you know that, and you know that you've got a subtropical climate, and you know that that has an impact on in elevating the amount of disease pressure that we face here, and you know that the dominant variety in this area is Semillon, and you know that Semillon has a thin skin. So all of these things are pointing to a disaster, really. But yet we end up with something which can be one of the true fine white wines of the world. And there are other varieties in the Hunter as well, which you must also know about. But let's just concentrate on Semillon just for 1 second. And the human decision to react to that subtropical climate by picking earlier to hopefully avoid the rain before rot sets in has given us a style of wine which is very particular. And so, again, I know it's very hard, and the reason why I'm doing this is to demonstrate the point as well. It's very hard not to jump around into the next part of the question in a way, which is about the style of the wines. I think just relax a little bit. You can always allude to that or mention it, and then talk about it more fully in the next section. Don't feel that you can't possibly mention the actual finished wine at this point, or the impact of the growing environment on the finished wine. You can just mention it, and then you can talk.
You would say something like that it has an impact on a grape variety such as Semillon. Put something like that. Yes, almost like a holding sentence in there, which you'll then describe later on. Right.
And then everything else that you've said, Jimmy, again, I mean, we've talked about this in other videos. If you're looking at sandy loams, obviously depending on the ratio of the sand to the loam, sand is a free draining soil. So again, it's something which helps reduce some of that humidity. We know that things like schist or shale have low fertility. So again, that can devigor, that can reduce canopy size, that can reduce humidity naturally, because it's not trapped, because you still allow airflow within the canopy. Obviously, the similarities here in terms of, you look at the climates and they're not similar really at all. But when you look at latitude, obviously they are, because they're all relatively low, particularly the Hunter, because obviously you're a little bit further north. North of Sydney, but again, there are lots of things. There are lots of things in which I think you can compare legitimately, but there are some things which are clearly absolute key factors in ultimately which you have to communicate and show your understanding of, because without that understanding of that particular growing environment, without recognizing the maritime climate, the high rainfall within the growing season, then all of the other things don't really make much sense.
And I love that we're re-emphasizing a key point we talked about in other videos in the introduction to this video about critical thinking, about and you just said it there, yes, it's very easy to regurgitate a fact, but please give credibility behind that, understanding behind it. For access to the remaining video and lots more exclusive video content with hundreds of tutor-led videos, please visit the Wine with Jimmy e-learning platform and sign up today. Cheers!